So, we're going to be slide free, which as a recovering management consultant is difficult for me too. So, in terms of what we're going to do today, it's going to be 4 primary things. So first, we're going to talk a little bit, I'm going to just tell you a little bit about me, so you have a context. Messy handwriting is a sign of intelligence, just so we're clear. Then I'm going to tell you about the Marsh story and what we did with social media and social transformation there, which I think was pretty interesting. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what I see as some of the biggest pitfalls in what I would say is enterprise social. And then the real kind of dynamic part that I think is going to be the most interesting is we'll have a social strategy workshop. And I'm going to show you a 5-part model. And on this one, together we're actually going to work. And so whether some of you have networks deployed, some of you are planning to, some of you might be considering it, some of you might be practitioners or consultants and analysts helping others. Wherever you're at in that journey, I think the model will be flexible enough to think about how you can either up the game, start the game, up the game, help your client, change the game, etc. So that I realize there's a lot of intelligence in the room. So what we want to do is leverage that in a very kind of fast-paced conversation. So a little bit about me. I've worked in HR and communications the last 5 years, and I was at Marsh & McLennan Companies. Marsh is the largest insurance broker in the world, and I was at their sister company, Oliver Wyman, as a management consultant. I've worked in the defense industry. I've worked with car rental companies. I worked a lot in aviation and aerospace, and then insurance brokerage. And then now I'm working with a whole variety of clients as I build out my practice here in New York. Everything from architecture, interior design, tech startups, period artists, all sorts of different things. So I am always stimulated by learning about new industries and kind of commerce in general. In fact, when I was a kid, I kind of knew I was going to be a business person. I didn't exactly know what that was going to be. My first desired career was to be a game show host, believe it or not. And that was, I like Bob Barker, or like Pat Sajak, those are like my guys. Like that's what I really thought I could do well. So yeah, close. Okay, so we'll have a little Plinko or the Showcase Showdown. Yeah, have your pets spayed or neutered. So we were. So I thought about that, and then my mom brought up, years later that I had an invoice book, right? Like write the triplicate invoices, and I was 7, and I wrote one to my sister for borrowing my toys with payment terms and everything else like that. So we still have a copy of that, so I should surface that one of these days. But I think, I've actually a degree in marketing and leadership studies, and when I think about social and social transformation, although I understand a great deal about technology, when I was at Lockheed Martin, when I helped, with some teams that build a lot of software, I don't really think of it as technology. I really, in fact, that's a big turnoff to me when the first question is, well, what platform are you on, or which tool are you using, or which whatever, because honestly, it doesn't matter. I mean, you want to have good technology, but whatever you have is outdated, whatever you think you need is probably not what you need. And it's moving so fast that none of us in this room or outside or analysts can really predict where it's all going. And there's a lot of really good technologies out there, and a lot of you probably use them. But the difference that makes the difference, in my view, isn't the technology, it's the strategy, it's the approach, and it's the mindset. So at Marsh, we had I'll kind of go through just a very brief situation summary. Marsh, had the second highest loss of life on 9/11. We had some trouble with the Attorney General of the state of New York. We had let go of 10,000 people. This is a 140-year-old company. Insurance brokers, you can imagine, are risk averse. Average age of the workforce was 48 years old. So there's an advantage to that in the fact that really smart, knowledgeable people, but also some of them approaching the end of their careers. And our stock price was, I think, a third of what it was a few years earlier. And we had gone through 2 or 3 CEO regime changes and a lot of expense management. And so all of our profitability, although our profitability tripled in a 3-year period, it was all through expense management. It wasn't revenue growth. So you can imagine as an employee, when your profitability triples through expense management and all the perks are gone and it's hard to find a stapler anymore or anything like that, when it used to be a very plush kind of great place to work in that regard, we had all these pressures to move the stock price and to innovate and to grow, but we were coming out of this very kind of dark period. And so, the investor community expected to see revenue growth. Our stock had a bit of a uptick due to, I think, the expense management, but they knew that there's a floor at which you get your expenses. Our competitors were also going through, there's quite a bit of, we kind of 2 or 3 big main players, and they had gone through some of the same sort of expense management and the same things, and everyone, the insurance and insurance brokerage are kind of behind the times in innovation and a lot of different things. And so, so all of us are standing there, a little bit fat, dumb, and happy, but at the same time knowing that we don't know if it's our direct competitor or indirect competitors are going to come after us, but something has to change. So, and then we looked at macroeconomic trends, and you look at like risk, and you think about volcanic eruptions or unrest in Egypt or all these different things, different kinds of risk that we weren't necessarily used to handling or managing, but as the largest risk management company in the world, we got to and needed to. So the world is moving a lot faster. It's a lot more complex. It's a lot more dynamic. But yet our company was not keeping up with the paradigms or the shifts in how the commerce worked or what our clients needed. And so you looked at our biggest issue was revenue growth. So everyone was very good. We instilled expense management culture. Everyone was really, really good at counting the pennies. Everyone was extremely frugal. That message got through loud and clear. And everyone was actually, people were afraid to hire anyone. They were afraid to spend any money with a consultancy, which in general is mostly a good thing. But you need to be able to make the right investments. And so people were still kind of in the bunkers and like shell-shocked. If you looked at what really mattered in terms of our executive committee and what they were on the hook for to the board was net operating income. So we had to be really clear about what the metric was. So even though revenue was very, very important, we still had to manage the expenses because it was about the net operating income. And that was the metric that we always talked about. And the opportunities that we really saw that we could seize was becoming, rather than kind of a transactional product company, will do your workman's comp or your employee benefits or general liability, to be a much more of a solutions provider and a risk advisor. So really have the customer, full service, sell them multiple lines, greater share of wallet, advisory services, captives, consulting, et cetera, and have a really embedded relationship to be very, very difficult to disrupt, highly profitable, and at the end of the day, really solutions-oriented for the client and help them manage their cost of capital better. So our CEO, who eventually got promoted to the CEO of the parent company, that was his job, was, okay, expenses are done, we got to grow. We got to innovate, which means getting all of these silos to work together, because we were organized like, I'm the workman's comp group, and that's what I do, and I've done it for 25 years, and the career path was like that. Employee benefits, I don't know, it's not my area, Brazil, I don't know, we're geographic P&Ls, I do the US, Istanbul, not me, so we had all of this. And then our chief human resources officer, her priorities were around employee engagement and culture building and morale, because according to all of our surveys and data, that was really kind of in the toilet. And yet you wanted people to go take risks and innovate and celebrate and have this sales culture. We needed to move from, we were excellent farmers, we needed to become hunters from a sales perspective. We could manage what we had, we couldn't go out for the kill and get more. So we had to move that, and to have that, yet that people feel comfortable and safe and supported. So that was the kind of what was important to her. And then to our CEO, again, it was the revenue and the really kind of being more of a solutions provider. So when we looked at what to do with social, it actually started from engagement and learning and development and kind of getting our mojo back. But a big part of the principles were that with such a experienced workforce, it made no sense to bring outside experts in, because we all had a lot of the expertise. But we had 25,000 people, 400 offices, 100 countries, and geographic P&Ls. And so that wasn't, if someone was brilliant in the Seattle office, people in Seattle hopefully got that. People in Portland didn't necessarily get that, let alone someone in Singapore. And so it was like, how do we unlock and unleash that? And the goal was to flow all of this knowledge and effectiveness and morale and connectedness to each other. And as our CHRO said, it sounds kind of silly, but with 25,000 people, you kind of have to introduce your employees to each other. And if you think about your turnover rates as well, we had 10% voluntary turnover. So every year we have 10% new faces, right? So you think in a 5-year period of time, like half the company is turning over, right? So it's like, how do you constantly make sure that those people, because we're all talking about external networks and how do you network and do the LinkedIn thing and Twitter and meet up with people and create all these connections. We just needed to provide meaningful connections even internally. So we created a, and I'll get into more detail later, but the right governance and structure and teams, et cetera. We decided that we didn't really have any technology. We had an advantage. We weren't a SharePoint shop. We didn't have a lot of embedded things. We didn't have any big Oracle product or database or anything that we had to use. So we used a lot of kind of consumer-grade technology, and we actually leveraged working with some New York startups and some consumer IT sort of companies, and worked and kind of built our own platform and solution, which we're now migrating to another provider. But that was the right thing because the market wasn't where we needed to be 3-4 years ago. So, what we did, it was a very iterative, phased approach. It was kind of the anti-waterfall development IT sort of thing. When we did a PeopleSoft upgrade, it was like 3 years of blueprinting and da-da-da-da-da, and then like, bam, go live, right? And it was just this like cannon explosion. And hopefully what we figured out 3 years ago was right. This was very much, very incremental, very agile. We actually released every week technology updates, just like you go to Facebook or use your Instagram app or something else. It's always changing and evolving and getting better. That was sort of our mindset about things. But it allowed us from a change management perspective to not drop a Home Depot on people, but to kind of give them one tool at a time. So we'll talk more about change and the resource requirements. But I think one of the things that often gets left behind, what we'll talk about with you all, is the notion of, oftentimes like when you launch a website or you have an enterprise application, it could be your accounts payable system or something like that. You launch and deploy it and you're done, right? It's live, right? Then it goes into some IT sustainment mode on like a help desk or whatever else, and maybe eventually you'll update it. But there's not this notion of like, how do we like make this more powerful? Not even the technology side. Like sometimes it's just the mental bridge of like the use case about how it could actually be useful to someone, how to be consultative and those sorts of things. And this notion of it's like never done. And a lot, this is going to take a long time to, we talked all about change the first two presentations. Like, we've got some of our folks who are like ready for it, some of them are resistant, and some of them are just kind of blind and ignorant to it. And they're somewhere along the spectrum where they're like kind of really big cheerleaders over here. We had a few of those. So it's going to take time to move 25,000 people who, by the way, most of whom have never worked in a company with advanced enterprise technology. They didn't come from Salesforce.com, or they didn't come from companies like that. They've worked in our industry, which is we're still doing paper. Everything's you should see the files and things we have. It's just it's incredible. So we dealing on that, not only the kind of community management side, how to gin up that energy, but also on the dealing with breakdowns. That's what we'll talk about, is that what's great about social is great things happen, and sometimes great things don't happen. Or sometimes things happen that don't seem like they're great. They're actually great, but it doesn't occur like it's great because it's new. So it occurs like a threat or a problem or something else, Like someone will question the CEO, and that seems like a very bad thing. And sometimes it'll seem even bad to the CEO, sometimes it'll seem good, and it's like, oop, pull the plug on the network. It's, you're like that close to like a complete, we're having the reactor meltdown here, shut down. But in fact, how do you create a framework and a mindset to deal with those sorts of things? Because at the end of the day, we're inviting 25,000 people to dance. How did you kind of, how do we create a mindset to do that? So that's a very, very quick bit about the Marsh story. And before we go into kind of our workshop mode, I wanted to give you what I thought about a lot the last 2 weeks about what have I seen in talking to many other companies and going to lots of conferences and benchmarking and reading, and from our own experiences, the pitfalls, because we've definitely made some mistakes at Marsh. And so these are what I think are, what I would say, the 10 pitfalls, and the workshop we'll go through actually addresses some of these so you can overcome them. But the first one is you don't really understand the business strategy. So many times I talk to people doing social things, and I'm like, well, what business are you in? What industry? What are the drivers of that industry? What's the strategy? How is your company going to win within your industry? Blank stare. Unfortunately, a lot of folks in different functions, including HR or IT or finance or compliance, don't really understand the business in which they're working in, because their expertise and technical skill is rooted in the function in which they work. And they might have come from another industry or something else. They don't really quite get how that's supposed to be. Or maybe the business isn't articulated that or shared that very clearly either, which is also something that happens, but that's a big pitfall, is not understanding the business strategy. Number 2, the initiative or the social engagement or whatever you're trying to do with social is not tied to critical business issues or metrics. So I said, net operating income was the thing that really, was what the CEO was on the hook for. Well, if you're going to do something, have it be the sort of thing that is going to benefit your CEO or your executive committee. And making sure that, for us, it was sales and revenue generation as well. So like having this not just be some we talked about pain versus pleasure in the behavioral economics, chart earlier. And I think Francois maybe mentioned that. And it's not about vitamins, it's about painkillers, right? So where is the pain, right? Where is the real urgent need? And that is where you're going to get much more traction on social versus some nice to have. Like, I'm trying to sell you on the fact that 1, you need it, and 2, it's a totally new behavior. Number 3, no executive sponsorship or ambassadors from the business. If your only executive sponsor is your CHRO or someone in a function that isn't the true power player at your company, maybe your CHRO is, right? Sometimes CHRO is like the right hand of the CEO. That can happen. It's less likely. But if it is, that's great. But who do you have in the business that's a real player or a real influencer that is all about this and totally sold and invested and considers this his or hers? That's key. If you don't have that, huge problem. Number 4, treating it like an IT project, not a human capital transformation. So if you take whatever skills you usually use to manage an IT project, like an ERP implementation or something, with your LMS or your P2P or whatever, your CRM, pick other acronyms, it's not going to be successful because that's about technology and it's not about people. And in fact, when that chart about being treated like children or adults, a lot of IT enterprise platforms are actually architected and designed to treat people like children. No, you can't see this, you can't do that, you have to have approvals for this. It's not designed like this kind of open, free space that generally social is generally designed to treat people like adults. So it's a completely different paradigm, so it's the wrong place to draw from. Number 5, you don't manage the detractors. You don't manage the folks because what people will do is they'll kind of ignore them or they'll avoid them versus either bring them in or engage them or figure out how to box them and bracket them somehow. And we'll talk about that. And so this could be your HR function, the other parts of your HR function that are less evolved. This could be your IT function or your compliance function or your legal function, or some folks that are a little bit more old school in their approach to how to manage people or the business. And so these are folks that eventually, if you're really good, you convert them to raving fans, and that's when everyone's sold. Because when you get Judy or Jose or someone like this that was a big naysayer, and they become a raving fan, everyone's in. So there's a huge opportunity to convert or flip them, but sometimes you just need to minimize and manage them. Number 6, you don't run it like a real business initiative. So many times I've seen projects in HR in particular, but also marketing, that aren't run like a new product brought to market, or a new service, or a client engagement, with the kind of professionalism, the rigor, the structure, the governance, the metrics, the reporting, the executive involvement. And so, the simplest thing on that, like, bring numbers. When you go to when your COO comes to the meeting, or your CFO, what's interesting is they bring numbers, right? And then all of a sudden they're like taken very seriously, independent of what the numbers are or what it's about, because there's like certain rigor and seriousness. And it's like speaking the language of business it's a numbers thing, right? So bringing that and having that sort of rigor and professionalism and seriousness, people start to take it serious because they see you're managing it in a serious sort of way, versus this hobby, side of the desk sort of pet project sort of thing. No, this is a real business thing designed to move business results. Number 7, no real change management. Just roll out the communication. So oftentimes people confuse change management and communications. So they'll say, oh, we're going to do a rollout, and we are going to, we're going to let everyone know. We're going to send out an email to everyone. Now, if any of you have ever worked in email marketing or even use campaign management software within your own firms, you should measure your open rates and your click rates. It's pretty fascinating. Like a 20% open rate on an internal email is pretty good. You think about that, though, that means 4 out of 5 people did not read it. Now, that's just opening it. That doesn't even necessarily mean that I took action or clicked on a link or anything like that. Sometimes those rates are like 1 or 2%. So you want to think about, just communicating or just, again, treating someone like a child doesn't work. Hey, we have this new platform, you should use it. It's charity for the firm. We want more of your time, more of your energy. You're already overworked doing a bunch of stupid things, and let's add this to the list. That's how it occurs for employees when you take that approach. Versus a very different approach of saying, hey, we know it frustrates you when you can't solve your client needs because you don't know who to talk to in Brazil or in Istanbul or in London. And we're finding a way that rather than some crazy spreadsheet and returning phone calls across time zones that takes weeks sometimes, of like a Rosetta Stone to find what you need in the company to make you really effective so you can meet your sales quota. That's a very different approach. And we know we probably don't have it right at the start, so we want to get your feedback along the way, and we will make changes, and we'll let you know what those are. quickly. I mean, that's a very different place to come from. Number 8, metrics and targets are not defined. Success is subjective. So like on the Kelly Services continuum there, there's like a certain number of users or whatever, or posts. Is it good or bad? So, we had 25,000 colleagues. We had one executive say, 3 months in, well, dang it, why don't we have 25,000 blogs? And I was like, well, you have to realize not everyone's going to blog. I used the dance floor analogy and said not everyone's going to break dance. You're going to have a lot of wallflowers, a couple people shaking their shoulders, and a few break dancers. Bloggers are break dancers. Lurkers are wallflowers. Passive contributors are sort of in the middle. And I kind of broke down the 99-1 rule. I have a video on my YouTube channel about that if you want to check that out. And it's, we talked about expectation setting. So from the start, because we were managing like a real business project with rigor, we said, here's the metric, here's how we actually measure it, and here is the target. Because it's one thing to have a metric, right? So that, it's great, fuel economy is great, but to have a target is very, very different. So say, here's how many people we expect to sign up or to use it, et cetera. And so then the CEO would know whether it's going well or not. Now, mind you, he's never done social before, so we got to kind of negotiate those and make them up to a certain degree. But it was in a way that we all agreed beforehand what that looked like, and then it became, much like science, right? Like we were testing, what's working and what's not working, and it was very, very fact-based. Number 9, no community management. So we'll talk more about community management if you're not familiar with the term, but it's a whole field of science about, essentially being the host of the party, tendering the garden, and how do you make things come alive, help build the relationships, how do you be the spatula for that bowl, right, and bring things together. And so oftentimes, again, it's just a rollout, and there's not that long-term community management, which is a seemingly highly inefficient way to do things. It's just highly effective. It really, really, really works. And so we'll talk more about that. And the last thing is having the technology be done once it's launched. Kind of a one and done, it's deployed, it's up. So much of the project plan is just built in this one, diamond that says, launch in the project plan, and it's the technology. And then it's like, boom, and the assumption is it's going to work. And it's going to be what people need, and that's it. So those are the 10 sort of pitfalls. And I want to work through with everyone this worksheet. So you'll get to see my photocopying skills. Make sure I staple these in the right order.
Photocopying?
Or not, or printing. Yeah. I did print via Bluetooth, so I was kind of hip, right? So these are, of course, yours to keep, to doodle on. So we're going to go through a 5-part process, and for each one I've got 4 quadrants. And this is kind of architecting your social strategy. And again, if you already have a network deployed, or you're helping clients deploy networks, great. If you don't have anything and you're considering it, great. If you have something, you're planning it, test it against these sorts of questions. And what I want to do as we go through this is I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I want you to take notes and use the space, but then I want to have everyone share about kind of what's coming, because what it might be for one company will spark an idea for another company, and we can kind of build off that. But what I want to do from a pacing perspective is have it be rapid, so like what I call laser shares. So when you share, very succinct, very concise, Twitter-like length, so we can have lots of people contributing and sharing. Does that work for everybody? So, the 5 things we're going to go through, as you see on the top: scan, identify, architect, implement, and adjust. Scan is all about looking at the context. What's the total business landscape? What is happening? This is thinking like a board member of your publicly traded company or the CEO. Very, very big picture. Some people haven't ever had to do that, don't like doing that, but if you think like this, this is the big game, right? The next is identify. Identify, we're going to go through and we're going to really help to, say move down from 30,000 feet to 5,000 feet. So what specifically are the pain points? What are the priorities? What are the opportunities to seize? Where do I really want to focus? And again, pointing the social capability at a real problem we're solving. Then architect. So this is about design. This is about the solution. So this is the planning. This is coming up with it, creating the structures and the systems, the technology, the people to make it happen, right? Implement. This is about execution and a particular way to execute, again, distinct from an IT implementation. And then adjust. Adjust is around lifecycle management, sustainability, usability, community management, and it's the notion of you're never done, and you're always learning, and you're being agile, and you're failing forward, and you're iterating. So those are the 5 things we're going to go through. Okay? So market investor board expectations. What are they looking for? And by the way, if you might have a blank in your head on some of these questions, that's okay. Just take that as a finding that there's more for you to learn. And that's great. That just points to where your research is going to be after this seminar. So what are they looking for? When I was at Lockheed Martin, return on invested capital was the metric that our CFO had defined was going to drive the stock price. So if we wanted to drive the stock price, we had to change our ROIC. It was a capital-intensive business, and so how did we change that? And so and it was net earnings growth at Marsh & McLennan. So what are those metrics? So what are they looking for specifically?
Ben, can I just clarify where our
I'm sorry.
mindset is scope-wise?
Yeah.
For this activity is, it seems like, by what you're talking about, it seems like it is social media strategy for internal, company-wide, corporate-wide.
That's a great question. So I would say, I think the way I thought about this is it could be internal or external. But really with a focus on marshaling the internal resources to execute on that. So I would say take on whatever you think is the right thing for your business or for your company. I didn't talk about our external social work at Marsh, but a lot of times I think there's a lot in the market more about external, I think, than internal right now. But I would say, take on whatever's there, and it might be by going through this, you're going to point yourself to internal or external, but kind of be agnostic to it maybe on the first step. Is that okay? Any other questions? So that's the board expectations. The competitive landscape. Who are your top competitors? So the upper right quadrant there. How is your firm positioned compared to them? Are you the leader? Are you in last place? Are you the emerging one? What about your indirect competitors, right? If you're a record label, do you see iTunes coming, right? What's happening to your industry overall? Is it maybe not about your competitors, but the whole industry is actually changing? So in your business strategy, lower left there, can you really say what this is? The dirty secret is most people can't because it's usually not articulated very clearly or it's not easily understood. But can you actually say what your company's strategy is to win in your industry and your marketplace? Is it defined, right? Is it clarified? Is this something you've interpreted, or is this like something very literal that you've been communicated to and you're clear about? What change do your people need to take to make that happen? Are you a hardware company becoming a software company? What are the implications on people? How aligned is the firm? Is everyone on board that this is where we're going? This is the yellow brick road we're going? Or is there a lot of dissension of this is crazy, or it'll never work out, or this is not what we want to do, this is the kind of business we are, we've got these crazy executives that want us to be this? We had this at Marsh, and we had a CEO, a couple CEOs ago, who came in and said, brokers are dead. We're going to be risk consultants now. And then all the brokers were like, well, what about us? And they didn't see a part in them converting themselves to risk consultants. That strategy didn't work out. The brokers won, not the CEO. And how well is it going? So if you have this strategy and you're clear and you're aligned, you guys executing on it? Are you winning? Is this working? Or is this like some goal just beyond the reach and you're not quite getting there? In the lower right quadrant, macro environmental trends. I'll give you a second to think about the business strategy. So the environmental trends, think of things outside your competitors or particular industry. How is technology or globalization or climate change or economic instability affecting your organization? It could be presenting opportunities, right? This might not be a threat. This could be, there's an upside. What about changes in the labor market? Are there other regulation or government interventions in different countries or regions that are impacting you? You can imagine if you're a Wall Street bank, the world looks very different today than it did 10 years ago based on environmental factors. So who wants to share on market, investor, or board expectations? Who's got something?
So for us, it's we're owned a privately held company.
Okay.
So the family has a profitability corridor that they deem as acceptable.
Okay.
For us, it's all about either meeting or exceeding that profitability.
Got it. So the family has a very clear profitability corridor in which the company needs to perform at. Who else?
I have something on talent, so it would be to get the best talent to the company or the A players.
Okay. So there's like
to
this
drive business results.
clear thing that we got to get A players in here. Very clear. Good.
Ours is more with less, more customer sat, more revenue, less friction, less costs.
Okay. It's like this effectiveness, but on an efficient base.
Right.
Better results with less
Don't
input.
lose a thing.
More output,
Same
less input.
cost.
Okay. Great. And how about the competitive industry landscape? Anyone want to share what popped for them there?
So for us, it's all about FDA challenges
Mm.
and any kind of regulatory changes that may impact our products that we're trying to get out to patients.
So FDA regulatory changes are a big thing about that impacts the products and the release of those products. Who else?
I have something similar, as well as being able to compete with diversified financial services firms.
Okay.
People see potential as insurance.
Got it. And you're trying to be more than insurance, but maybe your brand or your positioning is one thing, but you're offering services much broader than
We're
just.
trying to rebrand what we offer.
Got it. Hard to change a rock, right? You know. So.
Still want to use the rock.
So I won't ask what your business strategy is necessarily in case that's proprietary, but raise your hand if you would say it is very, very clear to you and to the staff of your employees what your business strategy is. Probably more than I would expect. It's often clear what business you're in, but not how you're going to win at that. Any other macro environmental trends that you all are seeing that are impacting you?
Sure, yeah, we provide contractors in consulting and training and technology, and so the return to full-time work is a big question mark. So as the market picks up, will the return to full-time work means we have not as good a pool to draw from?
Okay.
Or will that, will there still be the same kind of demand for contractors?
And so there's
Both on the talent side and
yeah, there's two parts of that, right? Because there's like that demand, will it exist, like the business, the pull, and then can we supply it from what's in the labor market, and is it the right quality? Yeah, very interesting, which you don't know, right? So what else?
For us, it's acquisition integration.
Okay.
So we just acquired an organization in December, brought about an additional 25% employee increase, so from 73 to 100 and whatever it is, 7,000 employees. So getting them integrated
Mm-hmm.
and capturing the synergies from that. Huge effort.
And a lot of, and then still leading in the marketplace while you have your internal house in order, right? Any other environmental factors that are either maybe an upside or a downside?
Global emerging markets, so that's just always on our mind. Growth in those emerging markets and the workforce being really different
Uh-huh.
in emerging markets. So that's huge.
So the emerging markets piece. So how do you grow there? What kind of talent or workforce do you have? What are those needs? All right. So let's go to the next page. Go ahead.
Can I share an observation?
Yes.
As you were going through all of this, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking for leaders, it goes like this. When it comes to social and digital technologies,
Very good.
they may think about these things,
Yep.
but they don't. When they start with social and digital technologies, they tend to start here.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really tend to start here.
Uh-huh.
And a great example would be, say, 3D printing for manufacturing.
Sure.
And 3D printing is a digital technology that has had tremendous and has the
Totally.
And I can't tell you how many people I talk to, senior professionals, I bring up 3D printing, and they may have an awareness of 3D printing, but there's no connection to that
Mm-hmm.
in terms of things like reshoring or what that might mean for their industry or how that's changing how work gets done again in this country. And that is a big macroeconomic trend
Totally.
that has a lot to do with digital technology. But it's amazing to me how few people connect all the dots.
Mm-hmm.
So they can identify all of these things, but they can't connect it to the fact that they live in the digital era.
That's a great. And any observations like that are completely welcome because we're going to see things as we work together on this. So that's a great one. And it's like, I often see just like, you'll start with your digital or social thing here, but it's not really related to the world. It's like, oh, we're really excited about Jive because the Jive salesperson came by. Well, Jive is great. Right? It's a great platform. So is Yammer, so is Chatter, so is all these other different things. I mean, these are great, but for what purpose or to capitalize on what or what's happening out there that we need to be aware of or thinking about? Any other observations from that first page? Okay. I left that at home. I don't have a 3D stapler, unfortunately. So identify, so scan. So we thought really big, 30,000-foot, board level, very, very strategic, high-level thinking, right? This is like, and so we're going to come down a little bit, and we're going to think more kind of within the walls of the company now, right? So the top problems or issues. What really vexes your executive committee? What drives them nuts? What seems hopeless to them? Or what are they really angry about? Where's the attention and the resource flowing? What areas seem to just get endless money or visits from the executives or time on meetings and agendas? Where are the gaps in fulfilling the strategy? You might be very clear about how you want to win, but if it's a four-legged stool, where's the weak leg? What would your competitors see as your voids, and how would they want to exploit them? Where are you anemic or weak? So what problems or issues do people have they want to share?
For us, it's lack of sales.
Lack of sales.
Or, a product launch that didn't go well.
Okay.
Or not being first to market in a particular therapeutic area.
So being late to market, product launch not going well, lack of sales. Like at Marsh, we had low adoption of our CRM. We bought the best one on the market, as we thought, and it didn't. And we spent a ton of money on consulting and training, and it was getting very little usage at the time. Totally vexed the executive. It just drove them insane. What else?
I would say, I guess, being born out of an insurance industry
Uh-huh.
that we're, you can probably relate to this, highly risk averse, that
Uh-huh.
we trip over ourselves, we
Yep.
get paralyzed, and we wind up trying to avoid things versus trying to get out there and be innovative. So I would
Yep.
say that's probably an issue.
Absolutely.
We literally last week rolled out a new business strategy that's scheduled to be public to the employees tomorrow. So it's sort of what's in it for me, what does this mean for my group, what are the impact? I mean, the timing of it is so right here and right now that it's too soon to tell where we'll go with it. But
Okay.
it's very much in everyone's mind. What will the reaction be, turnover, everything.
So all eyes are on the strategy rollout and how that's going to go. Yeah, absolutely. And then if let's just go down. We'll go to a little different order. The upside opportunities to seize. So what are the major competitive opportunities that are in front of your firm? Like what fruit is ripe for picking? And who cares if those are realized? Because some people in your company might not care if you seize that, but who does? Because those would be great people to work with if you can help seize those. And what would they be worth? If you harvested that fruit, what's it worth? So what? How does that change some of those metrics? How does that better fulfill the board or the investors? What would it take to seize them? Like what's missing, or what would that take? And do your employees even know what these are? Or is this like a secret? So in the insurance brokerage space, data and analytics, like it's historically been a relationship-driven business. Your broker's your buddy. High emotional intelligence business, moving to a much more data-driven sale and a lot more sophisticated customers. So the big opportunity was all around data and analytics, and managing the total cost of risk and having to be very, very data-driven and moving from a commodity that procurement manages to something the CFO is very, very interested in. That was a huge opportunity in front of us. How about you all?
Are we in the upside or measures of business?
Oh, I moved a different order this time.
All right.
So
Okay.
the upside opportunities to seize.
Okay. I jotted down solid brand, stability, highly ethical.
Mm-hmm. So you've got these assets essentially, right? So how do you, kind of monetize them or double down on them, et cetera, right? Your trusted company. What else? Tricia, then Aaron?
I just wrote it, mine's more internal. I said to understand what things like turnover rates actually are and what to include. So we're really good at running lots of reports. C-suite wants lots of reports, and so we do that very well. We purchase tools and software to do that, and they don't analyze that.
Mm.
Ask for so many reports that the departments that run the reports can't have time to analyze that.
Totally.
So they're making assumptions sometimes about turnover, for example. Like I called yesterday with the COO, and she was only including, like, she had it so carved out into one little group that I'm like, we're not even talking about our company. You're talking about one tiny piece. So
Mm-hmm.
I think them not seeing the big picture because they're carving it so much.
So that's this whole opportunity. I mean, you're generating lots of reports, but there's not a lot of insight out of them. This is just data flow, right? Just packaging and data.
Analytics.
Yeah. So kind of popping the insight out of that so you can actually take action that would change the result of what you're measuring, right?
Absolutely.
Totally. Big opportunity to seize.
For us, hiring the right talent for the right roles, and then considering either in licensing or partnerships with other organizations, pharmas, biotechs, et cetera.
So hiring the right talent for the right roles, and in licensing with other organizations and in the supply chain to work together. And these are big opportunities to seize. So let's go to the upper right. Measures of business or function success. I'd challenge you to think about both. What's the top metric for business success? I talked about ROIC for one business, NOI for another business. What is the metric or two that is the one that the CEO's bonus is resting on?
So from a talent acquisition perspective,
Mhm.
I put number of hires, but also quality of hires.
Mm.
So we bringing in quality people to,
Yep.
retention and performance over time.
So that's the game, right? I mean, you think about any sporting event you go to, there's a scoreboard, right? Without the scoreboard, it wouldn't really be a game. The spectators make it really interesting, but it's very clear to understand the rules of tennis at Wimbledon versus, ice hockey versus, football, right? Different rules, different games. So the metric is a bit of the rule, right? It's a bit of how things are kept score. So how's the function measured? So we talked about the talent acquisition, the quality of hire. So business or functional metrics of success. It could be, Trish talked about, is it turnover? Is it right people in the right jobs?
Sorry, sales.
Sales, engagement scores,
Engagement on social media site.
engagement on the social media site. Okay. And then think of other measures of effectiveness too. Could be your CRM adoption, right? So it's not, so it's like using the CRM that hopefully then drives the sales, right? Or it could actually be the sales, or it could be your product pipeline, or it could be your market share. Could be how many drugs do you have in stage 3 FDA trials, right? So then lower right, CEO and CHRO priorities. So think about their career, and you're their career coach for a minute. What's their legacy going to be at your company? If they walk away and they say, I did these 3 things at this company. I was there for 5 years. I did these 3 things. What are those things? I kept it from not falling apart. 1% profit improvement, unlikely that that's what they want. Whether they'll capitalize that, it's a different question. But ultimately, what are they really there to do and to get done? In addition to being the general executive at the company or the head of HR and the day-to-day and all the things like that, ultimately, what are their proud accomplishments going to be? So by the way, these are the things that are going to get resourced.
Yeah, I have an observation on this too, because what I have found with my clients is there's an alignment
Conflict?
with one another.
Yeah.
And unless you do this at a more macro level,
Yep.
and work across functions to say, well, you have this objective, you have that objective, you can't both get it done.
Mhm.
You know, how do you work seamlessly and integrate, have a common ground? So I think it's not just understanding the individual priorities, but understanding how they work with one another.
Totally. And see how those test from that 30,000 foot, because, look, you all want to march in all these different directions, but is this going to fulfill on the family's profitability, span that's going to be acceptable? If it's not going to do that, it's not. So align it, but it's a very difficult process to get those things aligned, right? Because you could actually have an executive that's successful that, actually impacts the company negatively, but they're successful.
Within their own.
Exactly. It's a good observation. So any sorts of priorities anyone wants to share?
Another observation that this is where it's challenging too, because so many of them live in yesterday and today.
Uh-huh.
And you're trying to help push things towards tomorrow.
Yep.
Then honoring their priorities may not be what's in the best interest long term for the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a negotiation that has to take place.
Totally.
To kind of help. And I was trying to think, there's a name for that type of change agent. And of course, in about 3 hours, I'll think of it.
You'll tweet it. It'll be good, so yeah.
It's total non sequitur.
Yeah.
But it is that idea of not pushing change too hard.
Yeah.
But still trying to move them forward. So I wouldn't. There's a negotiation involved in that.
Yeah, you don't just blindly follow this, right? And it's a bit of the bend, don't break. Like you're going to push them far enough, but not to alienate. And it could be there's like the urgent and the important can be distinct. And so a lot of times executives will spend their time on the urgent. It's like the hot mess that's in front of them today. What fell out of the sky today versus what they really need to do. And oftentimes it's a godsend to have someone actually help them. They get very juiced about someone creating existence and structure and movement around what they really want to do because they're so overwhelmed with what they have to do. Tempered radicals. I would have no idea what that's about. Who else?
I was going to add, just from a talent perspective, our CEO wants his legacy to be around leadership and talent management.
Okay.
So think about the Jack Welch of GE, so John Strangfeld wants that to be his legacy at Financial. So that's very clear across the whole company, and then business growth.
So business growth and this legacy around talent management and leadership development, basically great people, right? And so being very clear about your CEO's legacy is great because you can point and say, here, we're going to try to help you achieve on your legacy, and here's the method how to do that. Because really, most business executives can let go of the how if the what and why are clear and it's aligned because they're results oriented. Social is just a whole new how, that's all. It's not a what. It's not a why. It's just a how. Any others? Any other priorities?
Zero injury.
Zero injury.
Huge initiative.
Okay.
Because it transcends across so many things as far as the brand of the organization, ethical approach to business.
Just for context, what company are you with?
Eaton Corporation.
So if you read The Power of Habit about Alcoa and what they did with zero injuries, it's a fantastic case study. I put it on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago, an article summarizing it, but that was the transformative thing, and they I think quadrupled their market cap through the access point with zero injuries. Because that was the transformative kind of needle that went through the whole organization that changed everything, was a focus on zero injuries.
It opened up the channels of communication.
Totally.
People figured, okay, if I can talk about how this guy got hurt, then I'm also going to say, well, what actually would be better if we did it this way, and it just opened up innovation.
Everything. So, understanding those things, and so you think what do injuries and social media have to do with each other? Well, that's maybe the place to dig, right? All right, next page. Any other observations people want to share from that? How's this going so far? Is this good? Okay. So, architects, so think about this. When we think about this, it's kind of what you would actually choose to do. Now, you're just thinking and kind of brainstorming right now or whatever, but based upon kind of this 30,000 level view, this 5,000 foot level view, this again, to Jackie's point, could be internal or external, right? But what would the objective be? So specifically, if social was successful, what kind of impact would it make? What kind of difference would it make? Stephen Covey says, start with the end in mind. So stand in the future and look back and think, okay, so if this really worked, so what? Why does it matter? Another way to look at it is which needles do you want to move? Talk about moving the needle. Which needles and how much? You think about the values. We talked about values earlier, the Human 1.0 guys. What are your firm's values? Hopefully they're clear and articulated. Maybe they're not. But what are the values of your firm? And how would this align and fulfill and be an expression of those? If you have value, it could be quality, it could be around people development, it could be around client service, it could be around integrity or trust, it could be around agility. So the expression of your social implementation should be a natural manifestation of what your values are, which is going to be potentially different for every company in this room. If you had guiding principles for the project, what would it be? One of ours at Marsh was that everyone was equal, because that's how the web was. It was interesting that in our systems, different people couldn't see different things, whatever. But on Google, no one ever says, oh, you're a woman, you can't see this, right? You're a man, you can't see this. You're in this department, you can't see this. You're at this level. You're only an assistant vice president, not a vice president. So we actually removed from colleague profiles titles, because we want to de-emphasize the hierarchy. That your status should be based on the value of your contribution, and your attitude, and your professionalism, and how you communicate, and not necessarily what level you're at, if you're an MD or if you're a non-officer. And how will you know in terms of goals if you're successful? How will you know if you've made a dent, made an impact? So any thoughts on objectives, values, goals? More sales, faster. And you can obviously see that on both the speed dimension and the dollars dimension, or the average sale size, or whatever, you could break that down, and that's very, very clear. What else? Anyone that hasn't shared in this corner, maybe? Or Trish first?
All right, I mind. So I said our leaders would be both trained and using the technologies. They would be sharing via link with more people across titles, and the work would then not have to be recreated in each location because there would be transparency and more sharing.
So highly efficient because you're reducing rework, and highly effective because it's getting out there, and there's this transparency and clarity. Anyone else? This corner, I want a little love from this corner. I'm going to be very hurt feelings, highly emotive. I'll give you a minute to simmer. So let's go to the right. Stay on the top. Go to the right, upper right quadrant. Executive sponsors and ambassadors. So who in the business will be your sponsor? So who in the function, and then who in the business? But I assume that you're the function person you could figure out pretty quickly. Who in the business? So you want to think about two dimensions. So attitudinally, who in the business is going to get it, right? Like just kind of like there, which is great. You don't have to sell them. But also, who's got the cred? If you've got 5 sales regions in the world, what's the one that totally outperforms? If that sales leader's behind it, watch out. Or who's the leader that people would just jump in front of a train for, right? If that person's behind it, everyone's on board. Are there any other people on the executive committee that are sold, or the kind of folks, because you need these advocates because not everyone's going to be there, right? And this is critical. We talked about breakdowns. Another question, who in middle management is going to be a raving fan? So maybe you think about your talent reviews. Think about some of your emerging leaders. Think about folks that constantly get great engagement scores in their managerial capability. Folks that are in your succession plan. Folks that are your high performers against their sales quotas. Who are your star employees to involve? Do you have talent development programs? Do you have college graduate training programs? Do you have other things like that? Do you have mentoring and coaching and other things like that? Think of these folks, because really you're fielding a team. Right? It's almost like you're having a startup within a company and you're hiring. But because it's nascent and emergent and new, you can't have crappy people. You have to have A players. It doesn't mean they're going to do perfect work, but they're going to be the kind of people that can figure it out. At one point, we did this petition to launch our site before we even had a site. So we had people that figured out we should do a petition. Then we had all these people sign up on this petition to like teach and to blog, and then we're like, well, crap, what do we do with this now? Like we had 350 people all over the world. And we were sending them emails, but like we talked about, email doesn't really work. So all of a sudden, one of the people we hired, who had been there 3 weeks, said, we should call them all. And these people are all over the world, and we literally called every single one. And that's the difference that made the difference, was a phone call. Because we were a relationship-based business, so we actually had to move it off of technology, if you will, to the phone, and that's what worked. We ended up actually building a CRM for our colleagues, and we tracked our relationships with them and what was due to them. And so our community managers all had tools about managing those relationships, but so much of it was done one-to-one on the phone. And who are your influencers, right? So if you think of traditional social network analysis from an OD perspective, you're going to map who are the real people. It's almost like, like they're the ones that, like, in the meeting, like, people will look to see. They might not be in the top job. They might be 2 or 3 levels down, but it's kind of like, do they nod or they not? Or whose ring has to be kissed, or those sorts of things. So think about those people. These are all people that you want to consider fielding on your team or involving. Big tent, more is better. You want this to not be exclusive. There's this tendency, and I had this a little bit too, of like, well, I'm going to sacrifice being nimble and moving quickly by bringing too many people in. Not true if you bring the right people in. You'll actually move faster. So, but it's about, being selective about that. And people love to be invited, especially if you're going to do something bold and cool that's going to affect the CHRO and the CEO and change the results of the company that makes everyone successful. You probably want to be a part of that. It's actually, you're giving someone an opportunity. So you guys, I won't ask for specifics, but you're starting to see where some of these people could be fielded from. And by the way, hiring a bunch of outside social media talent is not where I'd spend your time, because the tools are really easy to learn. Your culture is not. The decision-making is not. The organization and the structure, your industry is not. In fact, I pulled insurance brokers or licensed brokers out of brokerage jobs to become community managers. They made great community managers because they had credibility, because they were brokers. So it wasn't like, oh, here's the social media team, or here's the IT marketing HR team. It was like, here's people in our business. Most of the people I hired, I sourced internally.
Full-time roles?
Yeah. We'll get to that. All right, governance. What functional partners need to be brought in? And to what degree? Really key one is decision authority. So social's new, right? Is social, is it HR, is it IT, is it marketing, is it learning and development, is it leadership development, is it OD, is it engagement, is it communications? Yes. The colleague doesn't care, by the way. They just need what they need to do what they need to do, right? That's it. So it touches all these things. It's kind of like across all these areas. So you're going to run into gray very, very often. And so sometimes your existing policies will totally inform that and will be very, very helpful, especially like on the employee side. Protecting confidential information, anti-harassment, those, use of company assets, that all applies to social. Your policies, you don't need a social media policy. All of those policies should exist. Make sure your overall statement and your code of conduct aligns with that. Very, very simple, save you a lot of time. But when you think about, there's going to be gray areas in terms of which, you're going to use different IT vendors than IT might be used to. Who gets to make that decision? So I would propose that you figure out with your governance group, the steering committee for this initiative, those executive sponsors are the ones that are going to make those decisions. When it's unclear, because that's a great way to get nothing done, is to be like, oh, you need to talk to Sarah, you need to talk to Jose, you need to talk about me. You're just running between executives, and you're having to educate each one, and it's like this death vortex of unclarity around who's going to decide. So have it be clear that if in doubt, this group decides, and that's it.
Ben, I just want to say
Yes.
something. So that was an aha moment for us when we decided to go social. We were doing these reviews and we were looking for approval. And then we learned very quickly that no one wants to give approval.
Totally.
So we started positioning our process as reviews. And everyone can have input and we'll modify as appropriate, but launch date is on X.
Okay.
So we weren't waiting for anyone to say, yes, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
We had the executive sponsorship and then we just went. But that was an aha moment for me. So everything from that point, any other social platforms, we reviews, not approvals.
And that's great. We had aha moments too, because at our firm, it was like if there was one dissenting voice,
Right.
it would stop everything. No matter who they were, no matter if they were a performer or not, anything. It was like that little bit of noise no one could handle or deal with. And I think that, and our executives didn't necessarily want to take the risk, because like your industry, they're risk averse. So figuring out, but if people were included and brought along, they were totally in.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this interesting having to manage both of those. Other observations around that? Anyone have other experiences like that?
We have a kind of a similar, so we've got a few different, we've kind of jetted down the path and purchased a lot of different platforms.
Uh-huh.
So we've brought together this task force group
Sure.
about including, and it's almost like now our issue is everybody's got their own agenda a little bit with the platform that they've invested in.
Yeah.
And it's not a great associate experience because they don't even know where to go and how to engage.
Yeah.
It's all over the map. So it's an interesting thing. It's like we've got all the right players at the table, but nobody can all get aligned on like what's the right focus. Like what is our real strategy here? Because my leader's saying this, my leader's saying this.
Sounds like you have many social strategies.
Yes. Yeah.
You have a lot of rice bowls, right? And so, and you think about, and I've been to your firm, and thinking about, how do you leverage it? Because there's a lot of assets there, but if there's like a lot of, zero sum win lose sort of behaviors and whatever, that like how do you kind of scoop all that up, right?
And then there's like the turf.
Totally, absolutely. And then managing the detractors. So on this, you want to think about there are people that. So I'm not talking about the people that are actually trying to throw sand in the gears because they're jerks. We're not talking about those people. Those people are jerks, and they probably should be fired. What we're talking about is people that think that they're doing their job by protecting the company from anything new. So, and they may actually be doing their job, and they may not. So one of the insights, the aha moments we had at Marsh is one of the things, if you summarize what we do as a company, we help clients. We'll go into a big client. Many of you here at this table are clients. And we would go in and look at everything that could go wrong, and we'd have a plan to mitigate that risk. We were really good at like being Debbie Downer, finding out what could go wrong. Well, the problem is if you apply that competitive approach and technique that makes us billions of dollars every year to internal new ideas, it's very easy to poke at everything that could potentially go wrong. That's not the way to get something off the ground, is to look at everything that could go wrong, right? So what we had to do is kind of temper that a little bit, right? And so I had to start, people would be like, well, this could happen, and that could happen, and this could happen. And I'm like, yes, and a meteor could hit the building, right? And I would say, what is your proposal? That's where we kind of got to, was what is your proposal? Now, sometimes it'd be completely unreasonable. No one can post on the network without a C-suite approval of their post. That's a killer social network. I mean, talk about a party, So, but then you sometimes would get to really reasonable or good things, right? Thinking about, like, let's say legal and compliance sometimes can be blockers in this. They don't have to be. In fact, our legal group was really great, but we just had to get role clarity because, and I have many friends who are lawyers, and I love lawyers, but you need to be clear about what the lawyers decide on and what they advise on. And typically your company will have some criteria around that. So there's some things like indemnity that the buck stops with your general counsel. That's it. Sorry. Doesn't matter. There's other things that it's about being eyes wide open and having known risks and balancing the potential upside business impact with the potential downside. And sometimes there's actually forms and process for the business to sign off on the risk. And then legal will let it go, but oftentimes you're not told that. The incentive is just to not take the risk, right, because it's risk averse. But we actually had processes, and because we had an executive committee and decision authority, we could say, oh, we're going to use a startup with 15 employees as an IT provider when typically we wouldn't do that for a company like us. And we're clear about the risks, and then we had the executive sponsor sign off on it, and boom, we are in business. So those are the sorts of things that you can work with. You got to kind of understand who does what in the role clarity. You have other times you'll have like IT that'll want to turn it into a big IT project, and they're going to be like, well, tell us what you need, and we'll go work with vendors, and we'll find out. Or no, we're a SharePoint shop, we're going to use SharePoint, or we've got this, and you have to use this. And having it be clear that it's not an IT project, right? And being clear about the objectives you have, and figuring out, do you have the IT group that's like the Fort Knox group, and it's the control group, or do you have like the really cutting edge IT group that you can partner with and work with? Figure out what you got and to what degree you're going to involve them or not involve them. So any other thoughts on governance or things in that domain? Does Corner have anything? I'm coming. Uh-huh.
involve them in the discussion. So for us, it's legal, bringing them in very early in that process.
Yes.
So you're not at the point where you're ready to make a decision, but let's talk about it, let's have the education, so then when you get to the decision-making point, it's a lot easier to kind of move things in the direction you want to go.
So yeah, getting people to the table early. So you can imagine, just have a little empathy and be a lawyer for a second and think, okay, do I really want to get a contract thrown on my desk and say, can you redline this because we want to jam this through in 3 days? That doesn't really feel like you're getting treated like a partner or included. Versus like we had lawyers who say, well, you know, one way we can minimize the risk is actually have the source code be put in escrow. I didn't even know what they were talking about. But it was like this brilliant thing, and that's what we did, and it totally worked because they had done other deals like this at other companies, and they were absolutely great partners, and because they were brought in at the right time, they could help with that. Or internal audit did an architecture review on data privacy or these sorts of things, you know. But again, you know, managing kind of, again, you're fielding a team, so it's not just anyone from legal. It's like getting your executive sponsors to work with the GC to say, who's your best, most, you know, bright, quickest problem-solving, open-minded lawyer? Let's bring them on, right? So those sorts of things. Anything else on governance?
Well, one of the things that a lot of organizations have to deal with is sometimes
Yep.
so that should be decided on board. Are you going to allow that? And what kind of security conditions you put into it? So that's going to really impact some of that steps you take. I think that's one thing that really has to go upfront.
And that's perfect. So we'll go right to technology solutions. So is this going to be a desktop experience? Is it going to be mobile? If it's mobile and you do bring your own device, you need to think about security. You need to think about, is this something they need to sign into every time, or what sort of like encryption or things, or is you going to have a separate kind of shadow OS on their device, which some of these things are emerging right now. You know, thinking about what can exist. If you've got stuff off the shelf that you can use, that's great, or that you can, you know, work with, that's great. What you don't want to do is turn into a 1 or 2 year technology study and buying process or whatever, because there's no business results. Technology studies and buying and blueprinting and implementing don't produce business results. Your people using the social technologies produce the business results. So that process you want to make absolutely as short as possible, because there's no value added in it. And you can screw things up if you don't do it right, but it doesn't add value. So looking at what consumer grade tools are out there. You know, we used, you know, Box.net and Kaltura and MailChimp and all these things. Some of them were a couple $100 a month. Some of them were a couple $1,000 a month. But they were very, very cheap, very easy things, and we use kind of a plug-and-play, best-of-breed sort of loose ecosystem to do those sorts of things. You don't always have to go out and buy a $400,000 this or that, et cetera. You know, we started, our campaign management software internally was this like printing press, and there was like a bike and mice running it and whatever. I don't know what happened, but you know, you had to like light a fire under it and, you know, coal fire, as a shovel, and so we didn't use that. We, you know, used MailChimp for $250 a month, you know, or Constant Contact, or any, you know, there's a bunch of them out there. Exact Target. So, you know, figuring out, you know, is this something that like your IT group has a good PMO to run these sorts of things on the technical side, or do you need to kind of have that and bring that yourself? If you've got folks that are like, we manage the mainframe and we do help desk and that's kind of it, and they don't actually build and develop and deploy things, that's very different, because just like HR, their incentives are around efficiency and control, and they're not really about agility and flexibility, right? So you need to think about, you know, how you're going to manage those pieces. Consider your environment, right? The mobile device thing we talked about, your network. You know, you want to do a live HD streaming video. Well, take a look at your bandwidth. You know, you're going to like short out your network because you've got, this like, you know, dial-up sort of speeds in some of your offices. Especially, you got to think outside the U.S., where in certain countries the bandwidth is a much bigger challenge. Even things like browsers. I mean, we had an ancient browser. It was like Netscape or something. You know, it was like, you know, and so we had to think about, you know, these tools, and do they render, you know, properly in the browser and the environment we have. You know, you have the CPU, you know, computing power, et cetera, on the box, on the desk, to make sure that works for the employee. So you need to think through these things. Again, a very kind of customer-centric approach, like sitting in the chair of the colleague and what their experience is going to be. And then, you know, thinking about the technology in agility. You know, if you cast something in concrete, it's very different to move. How do you make it malleable? How do you make it something that's flexible or that you can update? Do you have the right, you know, whether it's architecture to do that, whether it's the people, whether it's the process, whether it's the money? You know, and also thinking about taking the barriers out. You know, we had to compromise to do sign-in because a lot of colleagues, for a number of reasons in different countries, couldn't access it at their desk because of cultural barriers and other things. So they were accessing it at home at first, in particular in Asia. And so, and we wanted to make it accessible from any computer in the world. But of course, you had to sign in. Well, then at the off, so I go around. I remember I was like in Glasgow, I think, one day, and I said, what would make you use it more? And this guy stood up and showed me his 30 passwords, his very secure list in his notebook, and said, I don't need 31 passwords, and I would use this a lot more, but I don't even click on the links I get through the email stuff. And we did email interaction. We try to make it as easy as possible. We had to invest, it was like $400,000 to do real, true single sign-on, but we saw a 500% increase in site traffic the next month, and typically it would only vary 5 to 10% per month, up and down, 500% the next month. Now we marketed it as, and we did a great job, we branded it, we did logos, all these things, but it was like, we did this for you, we took it out of the way, and we really saw things. But again, it wasn't about more, it was about less, taking a barrier out of the way. So you want to think about your technology being frictionless, seamless, how does it have email interaction and activity, etc. We allowed people to contribute to the network, the social network, through an email. You could do it from your BlackBerry. You could do it very, very easy without even an app, like out of your email client. And that was a very easy way to get executives to be comfortable using it because they use email all the time. Anything on tech you want to share?
At Oracle, we have so many solutions like this. And for the 50-year-old who believes in social media and all, it's like, if I can't get to it from my email.
Yeah.
The reality is we are still an email company.
Absolutely.
300 more rolled in while I'm sitting here.
Yep.
That's how it is.
Totally.
Right now, we're making transition. We have all kinds of great things that don't exist within email. But if you can't access it from email, we'll never make that transition over. So that has been a key, I believe, personally, I think that's been a key for us moving into all of our social platforms.
We found the same thing. It's like, how do you build a bridge? Because you kind of want people playing in this field here, but their day is called email. And so we would have executives that be willing to blog, but then they'd say, crap, I get these comment notifications, but I'm on the road, I'm on my BlackBerry, then I have to write something, and I send it to my assistant, and it was like this big to-do. And then we did reply by email commenting, right? And we're like, okay, well, we'll put, and mind you, just so you're clear, we use WordPress for the blogging platform. We never had a single colleague in the first 2 years upload their own blog. We just had a team do that. We said, if you can email, you can blog. Just send it to us, we'll do it for you. So we didn't have anyone learn the back end of WordPress or formatting, so we could kind of look at it first and a couple other things. We do it like within an hour or two sometimes of them sending it. But that was the sort of things, we had them, the value-added activity was the sharing the knowledge, and on the interface of the kind of going back and forth and commenting, it was super, super simple. And then via email, those sorts of things, but it was like not about teaching them. We never ever did training on this.
And I think that our new talent coming up, they're not email driven, and so whatever systems they need to be able to work all together and seamlessly, like we're talking about.
Yep.
They don't even know. Our gentleman who's in charge of all product development was his son's high school graduation, and talking with a couple of the son's friends afterwards, and they said, "Oh, tell me about Oracle. Oh, this is great, great, great." And he said, "Yeah, well, here's my card. Just drop me an email, and be happy to talk to you about it." It's like a top dog.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, oh, nice. And he said they laughed. They were kind of smirking and snickering. And he asked his son, what? What did I say? He said, nobody uses email. And so his card was an antiquated thing. The idea of communicating on email was passe. So they just need to be integrated, I think, especially when we're talking about where you go from that next layer. Yeah.
And depending on how your company is structured, a lot of companies are run by baby boomers and kind of optimized for baby boomers. But pretty soon in the next year or two, based on labor and economic projections, millennials are going to be volumetrically the greatest head count. They're not in the positions of power, so you have a whole organization that's structured and run by people and serving their needs, other folks that don't. But the answer is not either or, it's both, right? You have to bridge these things, right? And so how do you, and maybe, it's like, you might expect if I showed you a 60-second video on my phone when I met you about my company, that could be pretty cool, right? But at the same time, other people need a business card, and it'd be absurd to not have a business card, right? Or not to set up a phone call, and do something, like that. So you're trying to really bridge these worlds, and that's where that's where you have a lot of the gray area, is you're bridging a lot of things, including generations. Because you're building a town square where everyone's going to get together, and you think about the friction in any sort of community around shared spaces, right? Think about zoning boards or condo co-ops or things like that can be very friction based, but it's about when people kind of coexist and kind of work together. All right.
So,
Yes.
sorry, general observation.
Love general observations.
Hierarchy and iteration is what I was thinking of as
Huh.
we're going through all of this, because I was thinking, well, where do you start?
Yes.
And because they're your beacons, they're your guiding lights for what you decide to do. And so many organizations start down here.
Totally.
Solution, either because we're a SharePoint shop.
Yeah.
We'll just do SharePoint.
Yep.
Oh, I've heard about Jive, so let's do Jive.
Yep.
Or Yammer. Hey, Yammer.
Totally.
Okay, is it the right thing for you? And then governance is so critical. So many early adopters moved forward or had a bottom-up approach that, then they have to retrofit governance.
Mhm.
It's really challenging for them and solving like the problem
Yeah.
there. Yeah, governance would have really helped with that because it defines rights and responsibilities.
Absolutely.
Paper, rock, scissors, who gets to win?
Totally.
And I will push back on you on the social media expert thing, just because I agree, the technologies are easy to learn and you don't need that to be overrun by social media experts, whatever those are. But I found that a lot of people don't really understand technology enough to even make some of those basic decisions.
Totally.
So I was recently talking to somebody who said that they've got this mentoring program, they want to create a kind of private community for the mentoring program in their organization. They were going to use a LinkedIn group. I'm like, are you sure that's the right solution
Sure.
for you? And within minutes, I helped her realize that they actually already have Yammer. I'm like, why don't you just build it using Yammer? That's private space. Why are you going to have these private conversations in a public space where the most you can do is rent a room? You have your own property. Build it on your own property. So, and she didn't pay me for that.
Nah.
But the point is that, it's those kinds of things where it is important to have expertise, and then also experts help you challenge a lot of
Totally.
assumptions. So I would say, think of the experts as helping you a small slice, but a
Yes.
very important slice. You don't need them everywhere, but they really can help at a very high strategic level.
And I completely agree. I mean, we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in external advisory and consulting services with the right people, but it was much not on the implementation or execution side. It was on the advice, and it was very upstream to your point. It was pointing us in the right direction, those sorts of things, or being a part of the right associations or groups or going to the right conferences, those sorts of things. But we definitely, invested in those sorts of things, and I think that we'll talk about that. So we're going to go to the next page. So we were like in third gear, we're going to go into fifth gear. So we're going to go like laser speed here. So phased rollout plan. So what you want to do is not have this be like a 2-year buildup, because in 2 years your CEO could change or your job could change or you might not be there. Like, how do you get something done quickly? So how do you break this apart to move? And in startups they'll talk about MVP, minimum viable product. They don't build like the whole thing. They build like something small and they make it better kind of over time. Use that analogy not just on the technology, but kind of who you bring in. Kelly, you guys started with like one group on Chatter, right? One group, and over time it built and it built and it built and it built. You didn't say 25,000 people day one, right? Or whatever it might be. It was you started with a very small group. So thinking about that, build that out into phases. Setting an expectation, because this is different than technology, that what people see on day one is not final, right? Just having that be clear, like this is it, no. This is a start, but we're going to get going very quickly, and you're going to constantly see updates. Communicating that to execs, and then leaving kind of some space in the plan. We actually never planned more than 6 months out, because we didn't think we could see that far into the future, because technology was changing, our business was changing, our colleagues' uptake of it was faster than we expected. They were more sophisticated than we expected, and we had pretty high expectations already, actually. So, leaving room for possibility by not, locking yourself into some 3-year, roadmap. Going down to resource requirements, you want to think about one-time and ongoing. So there's one-time things like promotional products, graphic design, flash videos, all the things you do to like to communicate, those sorts of things, contests, the iTunes gift cards, those sorts of things. And then the ongoing, what do I need from a technology perspective or licensing or, stock image libraries, including advisory services, including consultants, including people to help, work on those sorts of things. Thinking about travel. I mean, frankly, even though you're talking about social media and technology to connect virtually, it made a big difference when we did town halls. I went to Shanghai and Beijing when I was in Asia for other business. And it was the biggest deal for them to like hear from me about it for an hour, and then you see participation go way up, right? Dedicated team members. I think Jackie, pointed to this. Having this be, if it's going to really impact business results, having this be, 3 or 4 people's fourth priority and kind of loosely connected, you don't generally get traction. If you see what moves in your company, I would assert there are dedicated resources on it. And then look to scoop money from existing budgets. We pulled a ton of money out of existing IT budgets and out of existing learning budgets. We put a few controls on learning spend, and it was like all of a sudden we were flush with money to do things. We did everything we did when we spent significant, 7-figure sums. Everything we did, we were flat to prior year on our budgets. It was out of existing budgets and savings. So we had zero allocation.
One point I have to make is the right skills, because I've seen so many programs, they put the 27-year-old kid, well, she knows social media.
Sure.
We're gonna make her the community, and doesn't have that breadth of experience
Yep.
and knowledge and just.
So as you think about not only having the head count, make sure that the head count has the right skills. And the skill is way more than just the technology and how to use Twitter or LinkedIn group or Yammer or whatever else it might.
Savvy,
Totally.
and then they wonder what programs crash.
Exactly. Under PMO and cross-functional team, upper right, making sure you have a key kind of owner from a PMO perspective, like, if in doubt, where do things go, right? And that it can get managed and triaged and sorted, those sorts of things. How are you going to manage this like a real business initiative? What kind of rigor and structure? If you have steering committees, are they scheduled every week or every other week? Is there always a deck or metrics the first page in the deck, just like you would on any other big project? Which functional parties would it be included to that? Does different, does sales have a seat at that table? Does IT or does legal or does a different part of the business, your executive sponsors? So there's an ownership and an inclusion, again, to what Aaron pointed out about bringing people in early. And then, how is this prioritized and what expectations have been set? If you have senior executives going out there saying, this is going to be helping to change our business, this is important to get that middle management, which we all know is where everything breaks down in terms of change management and implementation for anything you do pretty much, to get them to be clear that this is important, but have it be important so it helps them, doesn't take away from them. And then the last thing is on the change management. So we could do a day-long conference on change management related to social media, right? A week-long thing. But really, if I summarized it very simply, think about your clients, and especially if you're going to do things with your employees, but if you're going to do something with your client, if you had a new product you're going to launch or a big change or a way you're going to do business that was different, there'd be a way, you'd be really thoughtful about it. Probably be very delicate, you have lots of contingencies, lots of extra support. You might have your call centers have extra staffing and all these, you kind of think through everything, right? And you really be, you might offer extra credits or excitement or might be a big launch, very sexy. Why is it that those things we generally don't do with internal things or with our own employees, even if it's for our employees to be effective on external social media networks with our clients or our vendors or channel partners? So if in doubt, would you treat a client like this? Is the change management question and test to use. It's a very simple, there's people have PhDs in change management, but if you want it in a sentence, would you treat a client like this? And then making sure that essentially this is seen as a compelling opportunity for management employees and executives. This isn't like, oh God, another thing and da-da-da-da. It's very clear about what this is going to impact in the company, what's the upside for them. For our colleagues, we found that people over 46 years old were our biggest bloggers by far. In fact, people under 25 were our least frequent. Those folks, by the way, Marsh didn't necessarily attract the most progressive 25-year-old, right? It's an insurance broker. And a lot of folks from legacy families, incredible employees, but it was a different kind of social profile. But then folks who are over 46 were like, gosh, I've been in this industry for 20, 30 years. I would love to be recognized. I'd love to make a difference. I'd love to give back and share. And finally, they had a platform. They're like, thank you. But again, folks thought that these older employees won't do it. That was not the case at all. They were the most willing and the most excited. So,
What did you see in terms of productivity metrics? And especially, so I can see how in the broker world, we have virtual brokers that it would be less of an issue, but in terms of like an office-based environment where you have suddenly more time and device-focused versus meetings-focused or other things, or if you're doing both the meetings and the sharing, right? How are you kind of tracking what's productive engagement and what's maybe not? So having the knowledge out there is good, but kind of what are the limits of
totally.
how much of that?
So what we always, I'd say 80% of our content and conversations were business focused. It wasn't about the Bacon Lovers Club or the big football fan thing or whatever else, although it doesn't matter because if you're connecting on that point and you're from different groups, that can be the access point and that's the start. But we found that we would track our global growth days, which you do every quarter, which would be appointments in our CRM. We'd like everyone for the full day be focused on growth. and we started using social to like celebrate and high five and compete with groups and all these things to get ready, to do tip sheets, to do all sorts of product information before, during, and after the growth days. And every single growth day, we had step level change in our performance, and it was both in the social and in the CRM, and you could see that they were directly correlated. And so it was very clear on like that sort of like productivity, and again, tying it back to what's important to the business. And so we always, like all from an editorial perspective with newsletters and other things and how we'd feature content, we'd always try to bring to the top. There's a little bit of like the human interest and the People magazine sort of things. You want a little bit of that because that attracts people and it gets there's some juice there. But 80-90% was always around what's going to drive the business. All right, last page. So we've scanned the environment, we've figured out what we want to tackle, we've architected something, and we've started to implement, deploy, and resource it. But this is now means you've started the journey, not ended the journey. So how do you treat this as an ongoing sort of experiment and something that needs to be managed? So community management, essentially, just think very simply, who is the host of the party? If I go to a party, the best experience is when I knock on the front door of that house or that apartment, like Susan answers, she takes my coat, she gets me a drink, she introduces me to a friend, music's playing, like there's something like I feel welcome and I'm taken care of and it's like easy and I'm connected with people. That's essentially what community management is about in solving problems that get in people's way. So there's, again, probably bastardizing change management and community management now, but we're simplifying this to be quick. Who fans the flames, right? You have to have people that, again, when we talked about dancing, like the break dancers, it's really cool whenever everyone starts clapping in the circle around that, like who are the clappers and who gets people to do that encourage people to do those sorts of things. And then how is feedback solicited and collected? Because, your colleagues are going to have feedback, good and bad, about what's working and what's not. And you actually need to have a mechanism that's more than an email box, although an email box is okay, or a feedback tab. But really, a lot of the great feedback is when you actually ask someone, well, why don't you use the site? Oh, it's the password thing. They might, 1 out of 100 employees will say, could you please, ESSO this thing for us? And the other 99 will be like, who's got time for this, right? But getting clear about that is very, very important. Thinking about your use cases. So you might start very specific, and you say, okay, this is about getting people to use the CRM and booking appointments in whatever our CRM software is, right? But thinking about how do we take this capability, think of it like a muscle, like not the technology, but around the organizational capability to bring people together to do things in a different way, to be more effective, to produce a business result, and take that somewhere else in your business. So that's a consultative sort of thing that you have to, not everyone's going to get it and think, oh, what does zero injuries have to do with social? Well, you might start with social around, brainstorming around paper reduction, right? But then you get to zero injuries some other way. So that's about expanding use cases. Where else could that engine be applied? And what's good about this is if you expand the use cases, you essentially entangle your solution. In terms of staying power, a lot of corporate initiatives come and go, right? We've all seen in our careers something is all sexy and it rises, and then all of a sudden it's like not cool anymore. If this becomes truly embedded in how a number of things are getting done and how performance is being driven at a company, that has the staying power to overcome changes in executive leadership, et cetera, so it becomes more sustainable and stable. Dealing with breakdowns, upper right. You want to think about how breakdowns, if there is a breakdown, whatever it might be, someone said something terrible, or the site went down, or there's some data leakage thing, or whatever, right? Or it just shuts down for a day. None of these things ever happen with us. But if they did, that they would go to that governance group and that PMO, and that would be the point at which they're managed and taken care of in the solution. The thing about driving change is, we had an executive who described it to me. He said, Ben, you have to think about kind of having a steady march towards the change and not getting stopped by things. So people will freak out. Some things will blow up. Keep going. And so how do you have the right kind of people with the right confidence that aren't knee-jerk reactioning about their career or anything else, and that are going to keep pushing? Because there is going to be a certain group of people that are not going to be aligned or really going to be squeaky wheels about these things. At first, hopefully they'll come around to be fans. Some of them might never be, and that's okay. Make sure the executive sponsors have the backs of these people and that they know that they can kind of step out. So thinking about how to do those sorts of things. Managing problems transparently. Like we had someone disagree about a blog post about how to get along with baby boomers. written by a baby boomer. Another baby boomer was like, that's rude. Like, I don't like this, right? But instead of going to the person and commenting on the site or calling the person or emailing the person, they talk to the head of HR. That's so how things get done around the company. Never directly with the person. And it was like, and so the head of HR, my boss, called me and said, what should we do? I said, oh, tell the guy that the email got misrouted to your box and he should email the blog author. Psh, you know? And so, and what was amazing is she did it a very sweet way, obviously, but she actually encouraged the person to comment on the site, and so they actually worked it out loud, which was powerful, and it created a really cool conversation which aligned with about being candid and authentic, and authenticity was one of our values of the firm. So we got to see a behavioral change aligned with the values using technology, right? And leverage your existing policies. You know, I mean, you can, if you don't have a social policy, most companies have them by now, but you know, try to use what you already have, because policy development and change takes a long time at companies. And so don't spend your time there, because policies rarely drive performance. And then on the last part, improve, expand, and refresh technology. You know, usability is literally like watching people use your technology and seeing how it works for them or it doesn't. So it might be that the search bar is in the upper right, it needs to be in the upper left, because everyone always goes there, and why? Who knows? Just move it. But you know, be doing, you know, either hire usability companies, read books and figure out how to do it, work with your IT group, they probably have resources, but always be looking to make it a better experience. It's not about more features. It might actually be about fewer features. Thinking about agile development, thinking about how do you keep getting this and deploying it to make it simpler, easier, faster, et cetera. In kind of what's the method, whether it's IT, budgetary, approvals, governance, steering committee, to make those changes and improvements. And then, you know, avoid kind of being beholden, I'd say, to one vendor. Often social technologies, it's seeming, are kind of like they'll lay on top of one of your platforms, your applications, but they're not really designed to connect everybody. So think about, you know, how can you really have it be inclusive and be flexible, which is probably a whole different other seminar. So any other last questions on the, or observations, thoughts, shares on this page? Anyone have a great community management program?
I have one question in terms of like monitoring.
Uh-huh.
Like, this is a common question because we have great
Sure.
community managers, but there's tons of groups and tons of topics that happen on our platform.
Yep.
So my thought is, if I were like owning benefits communication, I would want to be monitoring and participating in any conversations happening about our benefits. But some groups are totally on board with that. There's reluctance on others. So I'm just curious if you guys, is that owned by like the community managers of the whole platform, or is it by like the groups that own different programs or projects?
We had groups, and so the group managers would kind of manage some of the group. But in terms of kind of quality, so we always distinguished inappropriate versus inaccurate content. So we actually had a total, I'm going to put it on my hand, the number of instances of inappropriate conduct, 0. 0. No one ever said the F word. No one ever called out, flamed some manager. Never. Believe it or not. I mean, we're a professional services company. We have a code of conduct. Our values were instilled. It never happened. It might happen to your company. Different tiers of the economy and types of companies, it might happen differently. But managing inappropriate is, I think, distinct than managing inaccurate. The great thing about inaccurate information being floated at the top is most people don't know it's inaccurate if they're sharing it, and that's a problem. So by having it surface, you need to celebrate the fact that and say, you know, if you see something, say something. But we always were very clear that quality was everyone's job, and that accuracy piece was everyone's. And so rather than even have it be at group manager or community manager level, it was every single person on the site, and we had a lot of communication around that. If you don't agree with something, if it's different in your country, if they have outdated regulatory information, like you need to say something, and that was actually a risk reduction. People at first thought, oh crap, now we're going to be floating all this inaccurate information. It was like, no, we're going to find where it is so we can correct it so it's right, which actually reduces our risk, not increases it. Any other observations? Or
I would just add on that at Prudential we use Radian 6 as well to
Yep.
monitor and listen about the conversation that's happening. And then just to build on what Ben said, we have community managers. And then we also have a service that monitors our properties, off hours and holidays and things like that. So we do monitor pretty closely. And, to his point, we've had like re-escalations within, going on 3 years that we've been interactive. So.
Okay.
so how'd this go for everybody? Is this helpful?
Thank you, Ben.
All right.